She warned me with a playful smile, "Careful. I don't play nice." I laughed then, not knowing that every glance, every word after that, would test the meaning of careful in ways I'd never forget. I still remember the first time I met her, my friend's mom. I'd been to their house a few times before, but she'd always been away at work or out running errands. That day, though, she opened the door herself. And for a moment, I forgot what I'd even come for. She was nothing like I'd pictured. Her voice carried that calm, self-assured tone of someone used to being listened to, yet it had a warmth that instantly softened you. Her dark hair was tied loosely, a few strands brushing her cheek, and she wore a pale blue blouse that somehow made her eyes seem brighter. There was something deliberate in the way she held herself, not posing, not trying, just quietly aware of her presence in a room. "Ah, you must be Liam," she said, smiling as she stepped aside to let me in. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral with a trace of vanilla, hung in the air as she passed me. It wasn't overpowering, but it stayed with me longer than it should have. Inside, the house felt alive but personal, art books stacked near the coffee table, a candle still burning in the corner, the faint sound of jazz playing from the kitchen. She offered me tea, and I almost said no, nervous that my voice would betray the odd rush I felt. She noticed, I think. There was a flicker in her expression, a tiny, knowing lift of the corner of her mouth before she turned away to fill the kettle. While she moved, I caught myself watching the easy rhythm of her gestures, the way she reached for a mug without looking, how she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Everything about her seemed effortless, like time had taught her the art of stillness. And I was 23, awkward, trying too hard not to stare. When she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed. Just a second, but long enough to feel the warmth of her skin, the steadiness in her touch. She smiled again, a polite one this time, and asked about my studies. I tried to answer normally, but my mind was fixed on how her tone carried that soft interest, the kind that makes you want to keep talking just to hold her attention. Later, when my friend arrived and she turned her focus to him, I felt an odd pull in my chest. It wasn't desire, not yet, just an awareness. The quiet kind that lingers in your thoughts long after you leave a room. That evening, walking home, her voice echoed in my mind. Not her words exactly, just the way she said my name. Calm. Certain. As if she already knew the kind of trouble I might be. The next few times I visited, I tried to keep things casual, a quick hello, a polite nod if she passed through the room. But it never stayed casual for long. She had a way of turning even the smallest moment into something charged, though never overtly. It was all in the tone, the timing, and the look that followed. One afternoon, my friend had gone to grab something from his car, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I was rinsing a glass when she appeared behind me. I hadn't heard her approach, just her reflection suddenly forming in the window beside mine. "You always clean up after yourself," she said lightly. "You're spoiling me." I turned, trying to play it cool, but she was closer than I expected. A faint smile touched her lips, the kind that knows it has your attention. "Guess my mother raised me right," I said, shrugging. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. "Or maybe you just want to impress someone." Her voice was teasing, but there was something under it, something that felt aimed. I laughed softly, unsure how to respond without falling into her rhythm. Before I could, she reached past me to grab a towel, her shoulder brushing mine, her perfume, that soft, warm scent, flooding the space between us. It was such a small thing, yet my pulse kicked. I stepped back slightly, but she noticed. Her smile deepened, slow and playful. "Careful," she murmured, folding the towel neatly. "I don't play nice." It was said like a joke, but her eyes didn't quite match the humor. They held stillness, testing me. I chuckled awkwardly, hoping to break the tension, but inside, I felt something shift, like a boundary I hadn't realized existed had just been quietly crossed. When my friend came back, she greeted him like nothing had happened, sliding seamlessly into the role of an affectionate mother again. But the moment lingered for me, that smile, that warning, and the strange certainty that she knew exactly what it did to me. Later that evening, as we sat in the living room playing video games, I caught glimpses of her moving in and out of sight, her silhouette passing through doorways, the faint clink of dishes. Every sound drew my attention like gravity. It wasn't flirtation in the obvious sense, it was subtler, more dangerous. A game of awareness. And I couldn't tell if I was the one being teased, or tested. The days that followed felt strangely heavier, not because anything happened, but because so much didn't. Every time I was at their house, she was there somewhere in the background, reading by the window, typing at the counter, talking softly on the phone. It was like her presence filled the space even when she wasn't looking at me. And that was the problem, she rarely looked at me directly anymore. Instead, it was those brief, unguarded moments, when our eyes caught unexpectedly, when one of us spoke and the other turned too quickly. Those seconds said more than any conversation could. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. She was my friend's mom, mature, graceful, probably just naturally warm. But the more I tried to explain it away, the more I noticed the small tells, the slight pause before she greeted me, the faint smile when she overheard me laugh, the way her voice softened when she said my name. One afternoon, I came by while my friend was upstairs. She was sitting on the patio, a book in her lap, sunlight falling over her shoulders. I hesitated in the doorway, not wanting to intrude, but she looked up and motioned me over. "Take a seat," she said. "It's too nice a day to stay inside." I sat a few feet away, careful to keep space between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. The sound of wind moving through the trees filled the silence, and the faint scent of her coffee drifted over. Then she asked, "You always seem thoughtful. What goes on in that head of yours?" I smiled, trying to hide the truth. "Too much," I said. She replied, closing her book. "That's dangerous at your age. Thinking too much." Her tone was light, but her gaze lingered. I felt it, steady, searching, and something inside me tightened. She didn't need to say anything else, the air between us already carried everything unspoken. When my friend called out from upstairs, she looked away first. The spell broke, just like that. She stood, brushing invisible dust from her jeans, and smiled, a quiet, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. As she went back inside, I stayed there a long while, listening to the faint sound of her footsteps fade through the hallway. That was when I realized, this wasn't imagination. Whatever was happening between us wasn't deliberate, but it was real, alive in the silences, in the glances we couldn't quite hold or completely break. And the more we tried to ignore it, the more impossible it became. It started raining just as the evening slipped into that soft gray hour between daylight and dark. My friend had left early, some emergency call from work, and I offered to wait out the storm before heading home. She didn't seem surprised, only smiled faintly and said, "You might as well stay for dinner. It's not the kind of rain that ends quickly." The house felt different without anyone else in it. Quieter. Every sound carried, the simmering of the pan, the ticking of the wall clock, the steady hiss of rain against the windows. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back loosely. I tried to help, but she waved me off with that easy, teasing tone of hers. "Sit. You'll only get in the way." So I did. From my seat at the counter, I watched her. Not intentionally, but because it was impossible not to. The way she hummed softly as she stirred, the light from the stove warming her skin, the scent of herbs and butter filling the air, it all felt too intimate for something so ordinary. When she finally sat across from me, the meal simple but comforting, she looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. "You're quiet tonight," she said, sipping her wine. "Just tired," I lied. She murmured, eyes studying me over the rim of her glass. "Or thinking too much again?" I smiled, and she smiled back, small, knowing. For a while, we just listened to the rain. It drummed softly on the roof, wrapped around the house like a blanket. The kind of weather that pulls you closer without asking permission. When she started talking again, her tone had changed, softer, edged with something personal. She told me her son rarely stayed home anymore, that the house had grown too quiet lately. "It's strange," she said, tracing her finger along the rim of her glass. "You spend years wishing for peace, and then one day, it feels like silence." I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. The sadness in her voice wasn't heavy, more like something she'd learned to live with. When she looked up, her eyes caught mine for a beat too long. The air between us thickened, warm, uncertain. Then she smiled, faint but real, and reached across the table to refill my glass. Her fingers brushed mine, light, deliberate, and my chest tightened. We both pretended it meant nothing, but the silence that followed said everything. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, relentless, as if it knew neither of us wanted the night to end. The storm hadn't let up by the time dinner ended. She suggested we move to the living room, where the soft hum of rain blended with the faint crackle from the fireplace she'd just lit. The room glowed in that golden-orange light that makes everything feel closer, warmer, more personal. I took the couch, and she settled at the far end, but somehow, it didn't feel like enough distance. She pulled a blanket around herself, one she said she kept there for quiet nights like this. Her tone made me wonder how many of those nights she'd spent alone. We talked about nothing, really. Work. Music. The kind of films she liked. I found myself listening less to her words and more to her voice, the way it softened when she laughed, how it dropped lower when she asked me questions that felt too direct to be casual. At one point, I mentioned a small regret from my past, something about missing an opportunity when I was younger. She looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, "You're still young. Regret doesn't belong to you yet." It was meant kindly, but something in her tone, gentle, wistful, made my throat tighten. I turned my head, pretending to watch the rain streak down the window. "And you?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Do you have any?" For the first time, she didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the fire, the flames flickering across her face, drawing out every quiet thought she didn't say aloud. "A few," she finally whispered. "Mostly about things I didn't let myself feel." The words hung there, heavy and fragile. I could feel the space between us shrinking, not because either of us moved, but because something pulled. When she shifted slightly, the edge of the blanket brushed against my leg. I should have moved away. Instead, I stayed still, caught between sense and desire. Her gaze lifted, finding mine, calm, unflinching. For a moment, neither of us breathed. The world narrowed to the sound of rain, the glow of the fire, and the faint tremor in her exhale. Then she looked down, breaking whatever spell had formed. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said quietly. It wasn't a scolding, more a confession. "I didn't mean to," I murmured, though both of us knew that wasn't true. She smiled then, small, bittersweet, and turned her attention back to the fire. We spent the rest of the evening in silence, pretending nothing had changed, even though everything had. Outside, the storm began to fade, but the tension between us stayed, gentle, unresolved, and impossibly alive. After that night, things changed, quietly, but undeniably. She didn't avoid me exactly, but she built small spaces between us, subtle enough that no one else would notice. Her greetings became shorter, her laughter more careful. It was as if that one almost moment had left a mark neither of us dared to acknowledge. For a while, I thought it was guilt, that she regretted letting the air between us get so heavy. But as the days passed, I realized it wasn't regret I saw in her eyes when we spoke, it was restraint. A conscious effort to hold something back. I told myself to move on, to treat her like before, my friend's mom, a woman I respected, nothing more. But the mind is weaker than memory. Every time I caught a trace of her perfume in the hallway or heard her voice drift through the house, something in me turned. One morning, she asked if I could help carry some boxes to the attic. It felt almost normal again, the two of us working side by side, pretending the past few days hadn't happened. But every time our hands brushed, it lingered. Every polite thank you came wrapped in silence. When the last box was stacked, she leaned against the wall to catch her breath. "I forget how heavy some things get when you hold on to them too long," she said, half to herself. I wanted to ask if she meant the boxes or something else, but I didn't. I just nodded, watching the light from the attic window trace the faint lines of exhaustion near her eyes. As we climbed back down, she paused at the bottom step, her hand still on the railing. "You've been quiet lately," she said without turning around. I didn't want to make things awkward, I admitted. She smiled at that, a sad, knowing smile. "Awkward is fine," she said softly. "It's honesty that's harder." For a second, I thought she might say more. Instead, she turned toward the kitchen, motioning for me to follow. She poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of me. When our hands met over the mug, she didn't pull away right away this time. "You've reminded me what it feels like to be seen," she said, her voice almost a whisper. It wasn't a confession, not exactly. But it was enough. Enough to make me realize that what we shared wasn't built on impulse or attraction, it was something deeper, quieter, and infinitely more complicated. That evening, walking home, I tried to convince myself it would fade. But deep down, I knew the truth. Once someone lets you see the parts of them they've kept hidden, you can't unsee them. And neither could she. The following week felt suspended in a kind of quiet neither of us dared disturb. I told myself I wouldn't go back for a while, that space was what we both needed. But some promises crumble under the weight of what's unsaid. By the weekend, I found myself standing at her door again, telling myself I was just dropping something off for her son. She opened it before I could knock twice. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked surprised, then not surprised at all, like she'd been expecting this, just not sure when it would happen. The late afternoon light fell behind her, soft and gold, making her eyes seem deeper, sadder somehow. "He's not home," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. She stepped aside. "Then come in." The house was still, no music, no laughter from upstairs, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock in the hall. She poured us tea, her movements slow, careful. I could feel the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air. Finally, she sat across from me, folding her hands on the table. "You shouldn't keep coming here," she said. "It's not fair, not to you, not to him, not to me." "I'm not here for him," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes lifted to mine, sharp, clear, searching. For a heartbeat, she looked ready to tell me to leave. But then her expression softened, like she'd already lost that argument with herself. "I know," she whispered. The quiet stretched between us, fragile but full. I reached across the table, not to grab her hand, just to close the distance. She didn't move away. Her fingers, trembling faintly, brushed mine, not enough to hold, but enough to mean something. "I don't know what this is," I said. "But it's real. And I don't want to pretend it isn't." She breathed out slowly, her voice almost breaking. "It is real. That's what makes it dangerous." I nodded, though my chest ached. "Then tell me what to do." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she leaned forward, her palm resting lightly on my cheek, the faintest touch, full of warmth and ache. "You live your life," she said. "And remember that once, you made me feel young again." Her lips brushed my cheek, a whisper of a kiss that felt like both a beginning and an ending. When she pulled away, her eyes shone with something tender and final. I left without looking back. Outside, the evening light was fading, the air cool and quiet. Yet I could still feel her touch, not on my skin, but somewhere deeper, where the truth lingers long after goodbye. If this story moved you, don't let it fade quietly. Speech Balloon, tell me what moment stayed with you most in the comments. Red Heart, subscribe for more slow burn age gap romances told straight from the heart. Bell, turn on notifications so you never miss the next story that makes you feel something real. Because sometimes, the quietest connections are the ones we remember the longest.